Middle-earth: Shadow of War is a great game I desperately wanted to love, as I was a big fan of Shadow of Mordor. It was definitely one of the biggest AAA controversies of last year. It's a sequel to a beloved game, yet a fiasco of epic proportions. It's a good game and maybe a bad one all at the same time. Did snickering charity work and single-player microtransactions get taken just too far, covering a potentially great game with the slime of bad business? Or was everything blown out of proportion before anything could be validated for sure? Today we look at this black mark in 2017 as we attempt to uncover the truth behind Shadow of War. Shadow of Mordor was a sleeper hit. It was probably the surprise open world gem of 2014. Shadow of Mordor took the best parts of many action-adventure games, combining them with the Tolkien universe and new role-playing elements to create what many considered the best open-world game of the year. It was a smart, well-made, and iterative new video game. Shadow of Mordor would mimic the stealth, movements, and platforming from Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed, and the combo-heavy combat from prior Arkham games. You were free to do what you wished, yet a solid linear story held the open-world experience together. Layered on top of the 15-hour main campaign was the Nemesis system, a diplomatic storytelling device that would take this open-world game to new places. A genius integration that wouldn't be replicated until August of 2017 in XCOM 2: War of the Chosen. Players could interact, fight, and conquer different leaders of Sauron's army, each having their own personality and backstory. It was an exercise of analyzing strengths and power chains, exploiting weak points, testing relationships, and inching your way up the hierarchies in any way you liked. The story would move with the choices the player made within this system, culminating in an experience that was truly unique and exciting. But it seems like every honeymoon moment is followed by a dark shadow these days, and Mordor was no exception. In October of 2014, WB Games was accused of supplying early access copies to press outlets should they agree to speak favorably about the game upon release. An investigation by the Federal Trade Commission found the company guilty of failing to disclose that its influencers were paid directly by the company and for, of course, misleading wayward audiences. Pretty freaking scummy if you ask me. It's unfortunate that such a great game was marred by bad business, and you think that WB Games would at least learn their lesson going forward, but Shadow of War would prove otherwise. The legacy of Shadow of War won't lie with its fantastic gameplay or its rich world. It won't be remembered for how it advanced the Nemesis system or its interesting villains, its open world freedom, or its interesting skill tree layout. It will be remembered by the controversies of its loot boxes and its charity DLC. For reasons of simple greed and money hunting, single-player microtransactions got shoveled in the back end of Shadow of War. Players could purchase gold coins with real money to get stuff like new tiers of orcs that would make the final chapter of the game easier to complete. You could also get legendary gear and EXP accelerators to speed up the process of the actual game, and crates for the multiplayer component as well. However you slice it, it was just a bunch of crap. Now, Shadow Wars was just a big fat grind, yet ironically, it didn't make sense to actually buy any of the real money items. The game showered you with loot after Act 2, and if you leveled your orcs along the way, you would complete the final act easily, even if it took a while. The introduction of paid items in Shadow of War didn't affect completionists, as they didn't really need them, only those who may have sped through the game. So for those people, it was quite the chore to get the actual quote-unquote true ending of Shadow of War, conveniently held hostage by a mountain of pointless final sieges. WB Games designed Shadow Wars for the simple sake of making average players frustrated, so that they would fork over real money. It really wasn't a big deal for many of us, but it was more about what it stood for. Just the idea that a company asks us to spend extra money to speed through their greedily designed game just makes me sick. But this controversy was all but forgotten when the Fort Hog Orc Slayer DLC was unveiled. In a shocking yet admirable move, Monolith created a special DLC to commemorate the death of Michael Forgy, who unfortunately succumbed to a battle of cancer. The proceeds of the DLC would be donated to his family. It was soon discovered that only a small certain percentage of each sale would go to the Forgy family, and only from US select states. This fine print shocked the YouTube community, but instead of inquiring on why the program was laid out this way, panic broke out. Thousands of YouTube videos essentially castrating WB Games popped up out of thin air, some going as far to say that they should just rot in hell. It became a breeding ground for content creators to jump on the hate bandwagon and creates a feeding frenzy to cash in on the hot topic and churn out videos in a shoot first, ask questions later mentality. Most bothered not to inquire why the full funds weren't being given to the family or why certain states and countries were excluded from participating. It was a bloodshot blame game for money and exposure. Shortly after the onslaught, WB Games released a statement that did confirm that state, territory, and regulatory laws restricted them from promoting the DLC in certain areas. They also stated that, amidst the confusing wording of their announcements, every dollar earned was always going to be given directly to the family. But the hysteria could not be undone. Ultimately, they decided to pull the DLC from sale and donate directly to the family. Those who purchased the DLC were given a full refund. We will never know the true intentions of WB Games, whether they were malicious or innocent, but YouTube sure made them out to be the villains either way. Despite the fallout and the threat of boycotting, Shadow of War battled for the top of the sales charts in many regions, including the UK, where it sat comfortably at the #2 spot behind FIFA 2018. Industry estimates clocked the total sales figures for Shadow of War at 1.31 million, although no exact figures have been reported directly by WB Games. Of that number, 665,000 are PC Steam users who have scored the game an average of 70%. Considering console sales often triple the PC crowd, I would fathom that Shadow of War has totaled somewhere around 2 to 3 million sales across all platforms. In over 2,000 combined reviews, the Metacritic average across all systems is a staggering 3.1 for users and 8.0 for critics. What a hellhole for a game that should have been great. Shadow of War is a good game that had the potential to be so much more, enveloped in a sea of controversy. Its gameplay is actually almost great, yet the story left a lot to be desired. The Nemesis system was deep and rewarding, as it should have been, but couldn't carry the lifeless Talion, the overfluffed side content, and the grindy final act. When you strip it naked, perhaps it's not a sequel worthy of the original. Some of the critical components of well-made video games are the sense that they are complete, fair, honest, and made for fans. Increasingly, we have seen many AAA games buck these trends and instead shoot themselves in the foot by way of bad business. When that gets in the way of making a great video game, it is very sad times indeed. Shadow of War succeeded at being a fun video game, most of the time, but it failed at earning the trust and loyalty of its consumers. From the arrogant microtransactions to the overly grindy story, to the confusing narrative of the DLC, it's clear that WB Games is lacking direction and integrity. They may produce games that are in some way very high quality, but they have nearly become the shadow of this industry themselves.